people, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is very exciting, something that I've been waiting for the entire year. I know you've been waiting for the entire year. I am going to be ranking all my eyeshadow palettes that I've tried and tested in the year of 2023. In the beginning of this year, I actually gave myself a limit that I could only try maximum of 30 palettes. And I think I did a pretty good job because I have 26 palettes to rank for you today. However, I only have 25 spots. For majority of these palettes that I'm going to be talking about today, I do have dedicated content or some type of different eyeshadow palette content on my channel. Eyeshadow palettes is definitely one of my favorite categories in makeup, and I do have quite a collection, and you can find a lot of different content surrounding eyeshadow palettes here on my channel. There are a few palettes that I purchased between November and December that I will not be including in this video. There are newer palettes to me that you will see in this ranking, some palettes that were launched quite recently that I've already had a chance to test them and play around with them, get familiar with all the textures and colors in the palette. They will be included in this ranking. I think that's pretty fair. I will have some of the playlists linked for you in the description box surrounding eyeshadow palettes if you would like to explore a little bit further, if you're specifically interested in a particular palette that I'm going to be talking about today. In June of this year, I also did a half-year roundup, a half-year ranking of all the eyeshadow palettes that I tried since the beginning of 2023. And I wanted to make a side note that in that specific ranking, which I will of course link for you in the description box for you to catch up on. So in that ranking, I did include very few palettes that I purchased at the end of 2022. For today's video, I only considered the palettes that I physically purchased in the year of 2023. So technically I did purchase 29 palettes, and you will see 3 of them in my January ranking, like I said, because I haven't had a chance to fully test those eyeshadow palettes yet. So all that being said, I hope you're excited because I know I am. Before we get started, I would love to welcome new visitors and subscribers to my channel. Hello, my name is Eve and I love all things beauty. Here on my channel, I share about beauty and lifestyle. I upload new videos every week, and if that sounds interesting to you, I hope you enjoy this video. Stick around, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you in my future videos. And now, without further ado, let's dive into a ranking of all the eyeshadow palettes that I tried in 2023. So on the last spot, I do have a palette that I pretty much knew right away when I tried it that it's gonna end up being one of the worst palettes that I've tried, not only in 2023, but generally it's not the greatest quality. Alva 2 Mini Ocean palette from Odens Eye. Beautiful packaging, very compact palette, very lovely color story. All these shades very much appeal to me. But the reason why this palette is here is because of its quality. 5 pans, but 6 different shades. All these shades right here have different formulations. There's absolutely no consistency. Of course, except this one because it's basically the same formula split into different shades. There's a ton of fallout. There's a lot of powderiness going on. This palette is workable if you really have no other options. I am considerably new to the brand, so this was my first eyeshadow palette that I've ever tried from Odens Eye. I gave it a benefit of a doubt. I know that the brand is very much loved. There's so much positivity around the brand, but even though I enjoy this color story, I thought that the quality was lacking massively here. It felt very outdated. However, I didn't hold it against the brand. I tried more palettes going forward into the year, and you will see some of them very much down the list. So the next palette is also something that was quite disappointing for me personally because I was keeping my eye out on the brand and on this specific palette for quite some time, and I decided to purchase this palette. But when I got this palette, I was quite disappointed. This is NOMAD Cosmetics, not normal palette. The packaging on this palette is so stunning. This palette is weighted and this design is just so beautiful and unique. This is the color story that I wanted for so long. Whenever I got familiar with the brand, I was looking on their website, and this palette was the only one that actually caught my eye. So I was thinking to myself that whenever I decide to purchase a palette from the brand, this is gonna be it. So I waited for a while. I purchased this palette finally, and when I got to test this and create looks with this, I was so massively disappointed because I really love matte eyeshadows to create in the base for my looks. However, shimmers are very important to me. I enjoy shimmers. Like 9.9 times out of 10, I always wear shimmers, and sometimes combinations of 2-3 shimmers in one look. I feel like this is a perfect finishing touch for me, for my aesthetics. And this eyeshadow palette has 4 shimmers, but they're all satin. Under the studio lights, I think they look somewhat okay, maybe, but in the daylight, they look so dusty, crusty. And then as far as the matte formulas, mattes are quite pigmented. They pack nicely. However, they also very dry, and they do not blend into each other or blend out on their own. Sometimes when the palette has maybe 1 or 2 shades, something is off that I can still work with the rest of the palette, but this palette is the entire palette is a letdown, unfortunately. However, I have been hearing nothing but the best things about the brand and their eyeshadow quality, and I have purchased their new holiday edition. I can't remember the palette name right now, but it's the pink, gray, and navy blue color story. I cannot wait to receive that palette. Still haven't gotten the notification that the palette has been shipped, so most probably you will hear me talk about it in January. Even though I'm quite disappointed with this specific palette because this color story is quite unique to my collection, or would be quite unique to my collection if I could use it. I'm giving the brand another chance, one last chance, because I pay full price for all their palettes. So I'm really curious, and I'm hoping that the formula is completely different from this palette in their new palette. So the next palette that is up the list, it's not by all means a bad quality. It's very nice quality. It's very workable palette. This is the brand that I, again, only got familiar with this year, and I've tried several of the palettes from them, which you will see throughout this ranking. The reason why this palette ended up here is because of its color story. This is a Mirage palette from Alter Ego. So half of this palette has warm neutrals and half of this palette is a little bit more on a cooler tone. Here in the middle, we have some beautiful shimmer selection, different formulas of shimmers as well. This palette had made an appearance quite a few times on my channel in different eyeshadow related videos, and you've probably heard me say this already about this palette. I just feel like I am limited in the looks that I can create with this. I am generally a neutrals lover. I tend to like more true neutrals or warmer neutrals than cool tone neutrals. However, this is a very nice palette that you can kind of mix. You can go either warm tone or cooler tone, or just mix those shades together. And I do enjoy the shimmer formula in this palette. However, I feel like this palette only gives me inspiration, or enough inspiration for maybe like 3, 4, 5 looks tops. And then I don't know what else to do with it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this palette, but I just don't find it inspiring. So this next palette is again from Alter Ego. This is Sakura palette. This color story is very nice. It's definitely like your spring, a little bit more of a pastel, lighter tones here. I personally really enjoyed these shades. I really enjoyed these taupes. I think they look very flattering. On my skin, I don't think they're too cool of a tone, so I think they're soft enough for my complexion. Quality overall for this palette is quite nice, both mattes and shimmers. This cream formula was not, let's say, the bestest, but it's still workable. I'm not going to be comparing any of the Alter Ego eyeshadow palettes to their higher-end sisters, but on its own, this palette has a really nice workable quality. The shimmers are beautiful, they're smooth, they're reflective, they look beautiful in the studio lights, or they look beautiful in daylight. I actually do really like Alter Ego formula for everyday more than anything else, because I think it's just a very, very comfortable, easy to use, like user-friendly formula that you don't really need to like overthink. The reason why this palette ended up further out on the ranking is because this is, to me, not a complete color story. I feel like every time I use this, I need to reach for deeper matte shades to something else, to a different palette. So this is more of a companion palette for me. So the next palette up is another Alter Ego palette. This is a Luster palette. I enjoy this color story because, again, I love my boring neutral shades. I wear a ton of neutral looks on a daily basis. I have maybe about 50, 60 neutral eyeshadow palettes of all sorts in my collection. That's how much I like neutrals. And this is a neutral palette. This palette at first didn't so much appeal to me. However, once I started playing with this, I just realized that how beautiful these shimmers are. There are a few different shimmer formulas here, and some of them are quite shifty and beautiful. Like this shade, for example, has like orangey to gold shift. This shade has pearlescent to pink shift. This also looks beautiful as a face highlighter. If you're wearing any type of like pink blush, this would look wonderful as a companion, as a highlighter. And this shade is so stunning. I actually wore this to one of the concerts that we went this year. This is the only eyeshadow in this entire palette that has this formula, and it's beautiful. It's like full opacity, foily, very sparkly. You do get very nice wearable neutral looks, and I really like that there's a variety of shimmers. You do only get 2 mattes here, but for me personally, this is a perfect go-to palette, perfect traveling palette. It's very light, it has a mirror. The reason why I'm ranking it again this far out, because it's not necessarily super special, but it is a nice palette to have. So the next palette up is from the brand that I very much love. I have so much love for the brand. I have a lot of eyeshadow palettes from the brand. I think I have majority of the palettes that brand ever launched. Mini Trichrome palette from Natasha Denona. Beautiful color story. I really love these blues. These are my type of blues. I don't wear blues often, but when I wear blues, these are the blues that I want to wear. And when I saw this palette, I was really excited to try this. I don't have too many blue eyeshadow palettes in my collection, and especially to get something with Natasha Denona formula, I was very excited. However, this palette is called Triachrome, and this shade is supposed to be a triachrome shifty from like blue to purple, and it doesn't really shift that much. It's a good quality eyeshadow formula on its own, but it doesn't shift. And it does shift better in certain lightings, in certain angles. I just feel like it's not the quality that I expected from Natasha Denona. So I hope you get the gist why I rank this palette quite low. It's not because it's bad quality. It's not because I don't love the colors or color story. It's excellent, but I expected more from that one shade. So this next palette is the palette that was the first from this indie brand that I've tried this year or ever really. This is NOMAD Okavango palette. I love this packaging, beautiful color story, definitely captures the safari theme. I really enjoy NOMAD brand as is. The story behind the brand, their theming, their ideas, their execution, how they do their launches. I think the brand is generally very thoughtful because I got to try a few of their palettes this year and I think they're very consistent. And I think they're very consistent with what they do with every single launch, and their communication is also spot on. So I just hold the brand very high in my respects, let's just say. But here we're talking about the eyeshadow palette. This palette has two of my favorite things, neutrals and greens. You have a row of warm neutrals, some cooler neutrals, and then your greens. I have quite a good amount of green eyeshadow palettes in my collection, and I think that these tones are quite unique to everything that I have. I really enjoy this palette. The mattes of NOMAD Cosmetics are one of the best ones that I've tried. They are fabulous, and I really hope that the brand will never change their matte formula because it's perfect the way it is. And the reason why I rank this palette towards the end is because even though I enjoy my monochromatic looks, I enjoy my neutrals and greens, however, I feel like this palette is a little bit limiting. And then I also happen to have three pans, like this shade, and this shade, all the shimmer shades. They create the heart pan. I like this palette, but I don't love it. So on the spot number next, I ended up placing these two sister palettes from Flower Beauty. We have Coastal Lights and Garden Lights. So these palettes are new to this year. They will launch together. They're a newer addition to their previous two palettes, which are super lovely. The formulas are beautiful. They are absolutely stunning the way we know from the previous launch. 5 shades out of this palette except this one. They are slightly bit firmer pressed. They seem to have a little bit smoother formula. However, they still look the same on eyes. What I've noticed that, and I've tried it that way in my video where I featured this palette, some of these shades look beautiful as face highlighters, and they of course look absolutely fabulous on eyes. The reason I rank these palettes where I rank them is because they are companion palettes to me. I love to create looks with mattes and shimmers. I pretty much never do those one shimmer all over your lid type of looks. This is just not my cup of tea, let's say. However, I really like this palette as companion palette. So this next palette, you've heard me talk so much throughout this year, and maybe some of you even purchased it from my recommendations or because I've talked about it so much. Let me know if you did. Let me know in the comments below. But this is Garden by Juvia's from Juvia's Place, and this is your spring, summer, very pastel light palette. I absolutely love the shimmers in this palette. They are so fabulous. This is a formula that is quite complex because it can be sheared out and you can use them as a topper while still getting the undertone of the shade that you see here in the palette. You can also pack the color or layer it with your finger or spray your brush and really pack that color all over your lid. You're still gonna get that beautiful, super reflective, glossy, wet looking lid. That type of finish is my favorite when it comes to shimmers. I've used this palette so much. Before I started shifting some of my storage here, this palette pretty much lived on my vanity the entire year, and I use this as a companion palette for so many different looks. There are a good handful of mattes here, but they're not like super exciting to me. Let's say the shimmers, this is where it's at for me. So the next palette up is the very new palette. It was launched around Halloween. This is from a very small indie brand called Ladybug Glow. The palette is called Krampus Continued. I didn't get the reference of Krampus, so I actually had to look up who that creature was. So I'll tell you, if you don't know who Krampus is, I'll give you a fair warning because that creature is so scary. I generally do not like watch scary movies or anything like that. So when I saw the image of actual Krampus, I was terrified. I think they did a really good job making this creature look quite cute here. This is a very new palette to me. You will definitely hear me talk about this in my next ranking, probably sometime in January. I'm not super familiar with the brand. I had to familiarize myself with it once I got the palette already. I saw this palette flash into my Instagram feed and I was like, wait, I had to scroll back because this color story is so unique to my collection. That's why I got it, because there's nothing else like it. This is a very compact 9-pan palette with some very interesting mattes. Because the palette is so small, you can still get quite different looks out of this. So there are 4 special shifty almost like a duochrome shades here. They are absolutely stunning. I think the color story is very, very unique and very beautiful. This is definitely a different approach towards Halloween eyeshadow palettes. It's not the typical like orange, greens, purples that we used to see all around the place from the brands. The reason why I ranked this lower is because there was a little bit, I guess, a mistake that happened in production, and this eyeshadow I received on the side as a good shade, the good formula. However, this is not a magnetic palette. So this formula that's right here is not usable. It's not usable at all. I'm not going to go into details. I will explain a little bit more once I do the ranking, but this is not a usable eyeshadow and I cannot remove it. For me to remove it, I'll have to destroy the entire palette. That fact saddens me. And also these two shades, they look like they are completely different. One is more green and one is like beautiful, shifty, almost like a baby blue. But on the eyes, they pretty much look the same. They shift more of like this shade. So you do get two beautiful green shades. Basically, you do not get this blue. Even though I do enjoy a lot of things about this palette and trying the new formula and supporting a very small indie brand. However, there are a few things that didn't go as expected. So the next palette up is Trick or Treat from Odens Eye and Angelica Nyqvist collaboration. Very stunning design. I really love Odens Eye palette designs. They do such an incredible job. Super fun color story. I really like a lot of shades here. So if you know me, if you've been around my channel for a while, you know I love neutrals, I love my greens, and I love my burgundies. I consider greens and burgundies my neutrals. I'm very, very comfortable with those shades. Like greens and burgundies are kind of like my colorful neutral, if you will. So this palette definitely serves you all that and some extra. And some extras that really caught my attention in this palette is the red and the orange shades. I don't have too many of those shades at all, and I don't really think I have a good red in my collection either. So when I saw this palette, I was like, yep, that's gonna be mine. The reason why I rank this kind of like midway is because it again comes down to formulation of the brand, because I am new to Odens Eye and I've tried their palette earlier before I tried this palette. Again, it will come down to me being new to the brand and still exploring their formulas. And between my very last palette, the first palette that you saw today, and this palette, I've tried another launch, and you will see it a little bit further down the list today in today's video. So this was basically my third palette that I purchased from the brand, and I realized that this is even different formula than in the other two palettes that I've already tried from the brand. So I just noticed slight inconsistency within the brand, within their launches. Everything in this palette performs well, it blends, it packs. There are no issues with any of the shades. It's not difficult to work with by all means. However, I just noticed that there is inconsistency within the brand. Then there are unfortunately a few shimmers in this palette that were a little bit more greedy and they did irritate my eyes. That's why this palette is here. So I think, guys, from now on, all the palettes that I'm going to be talking about, they are very much favorite. It's just a matter of how much I've used them. Is the color story very inspiring to me? Is this product useful to me? Things like that. So it's not really about the quality. It's more of like other small aspects. So the next palette up is Nomad Air from NOMAD Cosmetics. Small 6-pan, very compact, neutral palette. Amazing mattes, amazing shimmers. I do like that you get like a variety of different shades within the shimmer, so you can differentiate your looks a little bit, and the quality is amazing. I am a huge neutrals lover. I've already traveled with this palette. When I saw this palette, I said, yes, this is exactly what I needed to add to my traveling makeup collection, because for most part when I travel, when I go somewhere, my work related trips or like personal trips, I don't really do elaborate makeups. I don't really try to bring like 30 of my different brushes to create different looks. This is just me. I'm not speaking for anybody else. I'm not trying to rain on anybody's parade, but this is me. This is what I do. These are my habits. And this is what I travel with, that I can take my basic 6 brushes, and it doesn't matter if my look maybe differentiates a little bit from day to day. It's still the same palette. So I don't need to worry about cleaning my brushes in between, stuff like that. So I thought this palette was spot on. This was made for people like me. The next palette up is Coastal palette from Alter Ego. This palette ranks higher because of its color story and because the quality is really good. I did the dedicated video on this palette comparing it to one of my favorite palettes in my collection, and it is Huda Beauty Rose Quartz. If you know, that is one of my absolute top favorite palettes in my entire collection, and that palette was launched 2 years ago, I think now, and it's still to this date one of my favorite palettes. I would never guess that this would be so comparable to Rose Quartz palette. I generally do not love cool tone neutrals. I am okay with them. Some of them are quite flattering, and I think this entire color story is just flattering on me. I enjoy every single look that I've ever created with this color story. The bar was very high when I tried this palette, and this palette did not disappoint. The next palette up is very good, affordable palette that actually took me by surprise. And I ended up using that palette so much. You probably know exactly the palette that I'm talking about. This is Ultimate Paradise Shock from NYX Cosmetics. This palette is neutrals and pops of color. And the pops of colors that are in this palette, these are the pops of color that I personally love. So when I saw this color story, I was like, yep, I need to try that. I absolutely need to try it. This is a drugstore eyeshadow palette. Drugstore makeup has come a long way in a lot of different categories, but eyeshadow. I feel like the eyeshadow category in drugstore is still yet to improve in quite a bit. When I tried this palette, I was quite surprised how nice of a quality it is. It is pigmented, it is blendable, it's buildable, it's just so easy to work. I could not stop using this palette because it's just such a perfect day to night type of palette. There are only 5 shimmers in this palette, but they are all different. They're beautiful. You can do complete looks out of this palette without needing to reach for anything else. You have your inner corner highlight, you have your brow bone highlight. This dark brown here actually is really nicely packable and blendable. It's not patching out, very nice quality. I was quite surprised by it. The next palette up is a sister palette from the same launch from NYX Cosmetics on Ultimate Jean Baby. My palette was dropped multiple times, this poor little thing, so that's why it looks a little bit jammed here. So you may ask, Eve, but you use your Paradise Shock so much more than you used this one, why you rank them in the opposite order? I rank this higher because this is such a cool color story. Like I mentioned earlier, I do not have a lot of blues in my collection, and I don't love all the blues. I think that this palette has beautiful blues, absolutely stunning shimmers. These shimmers look expensive. They look expensive on eyes. They look like you're using something of a higher brand. They are so reflective, they're so soft, they're like buttery on touch, they build up, they sheer out. You can do so many different things. I also really love the neutral shade selection that they decided to add here. I think they're super complementary to the blues here. This is a very small, compact palette, but also it gives you a variety of looks that you can create. Yes, it's somewhat limiting. You're not going to create 30 different looks with this palette. However, there's still different options with this palette. And considering the fact that this is a drugstore palette, it's a breakthrough. This next palette quality is 10 out of 10. It's one of the palettes when I use it, I'm like, oh, you know, when you have that therapeutic moment with your makeup. This is Stone and Rock palette from Odens Eye. Again, stunning design on the packaging, beautiful curated color story. But besides that, you also get very nice depth here and also a few neutrals. You have matte white, matte black, and then this beautiful kind of warm neutral shade. I do have dedicated video for this palette if you wanted to see. The shimmers, the mattes in this launch, everything that you would ever want. There's a shade here, there's a duochrome, this beautiful emerald. It's that creamy, thin formula. Absolutely gorgeous. I really love this palette, even though it's considerably monochromatic, but the quality of everything that's inside here is 10 out of 10. So the next palette is ranking pretty high up, and you may be surprised for this one, but I could not rank this palette any lower. I actually was thinking to rank it much higher, but then I was like, well, you know, there are definitely better palettes than this one. However, I've used this palette so much this year. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. This palette went with me on every single trip. I actually wore this palette on Thanksgiving. This is a midsummer palette from Alter Ego. Very neutral color story. A little bit of warmness, a little bit of coolness, pop of color, beautiful shimmers, beautiful mattes. Formulas, they're so easy to work with. It's effortless every single time. Anybody can use it. You don't need any special skill. You don't need to twist your wrist to make this work. You can do your full looks in the matter of minutes. This is a very user-friendly formula that kind of covers all your bases. Of course, you need to be liking neutral shades to enjoy this palette. I love this palette so much. I like the sister palette just as much. I think last year it was ranked very high in my ranking list. I am a huge neutrals lover, I'll say that again, and this palette just gives me everything on the go whenever I need something fast and pretty. It's here. So the next palette up is I Need a Nude from Natasha Denona. Beautiful neutral eyeshadow palette. I did a dedicated video on this palette as well with multiple look tutorials for you guys. I was debating buying this palette at all, but then I ended up having this, and I will tell you what sold me. Of course, Natasha Denona formula is fabulous. However, this palette generally looks a little bit more on a cooler tone, and it does pull quite cool on me generally, but what does it for me in this palette, color story wise, these two are rosy tones. If these shades were not here, I will not purchase this palette because this warms up my looks, and I really like that a little bit warmer transition On my skin tone, I think these shades look absolutely flattering. And then I can do a little bit more of a cooler tone lid or cooler tone outer corner. The rest of the shades pull quite cooler me. I think that the quality is very nice, Natasha Denona quality. You can't lose here. I said that in my review video that this palette definitely gives me bridal vibes and a little bit more of like a safe zone. This palette is very safe here, but it's also a very beautiful neutral palette. So this next palette, I loved the Color Story preview. However, I also at the same time was a little bit nervous of the undertone of this palette. I wasn't sure if I'm gonna be head over heels with this, but I kind of happened to be. I was surprised myself how much I love this palette, and I'll tell you why. Ghost Town USA from NOMAD Cosmetics. Again, stunning packaging. This was their Halloween launch this year. This palette is primarily your cool tone eyeshadow palette. Like I said, I don't generally enjoy cool tone eyeshadow palettes. However, when the cool tones are done in a specific way, I just fall in love with them. And this is that palette. I really love also how this palette is organized. It organized in columns, and you can easily mix and match colors together and come up with different combinations, even though there are technically 3 different color stories, let's say, in this palette. However, I find this palette so inspiring because the undertone of this palette kind of goes together, and you can just go to town creating all sorts of looks that you want, mixing all the colors that you want. And I also love that they did a little bit of a contrast with some of the brighter shimmers here. So you get the beautiful purple, you also get the bright greens here. I also, of course, enjoy and appreciate this neutral section right there. And there's a little bit of warmness going on with some of the neutral shades here. So they did something with this palette. This, to my opinion, is such a thoughtfully made palette. On the spot number 6, I do have a palette that is the first palette for me from the brand, again, an indie brand. This next palette is definitely very special in my collection. This is the first palette from the brand that I've tried. This is Heather Austin and Adapt Cosmetics eyeshadow palette. This is a palette that was relaunched this year, and I didn't buy it the first time around when the first launch happened. So when I saw it relaunched this year, I grabbed it because I was thinking about this palette in the meantime. You know, it's one of those things when you see something, you don't buy it the first time, and then you keep thinking about it and keep thinking about it. It was kind of the case with this palette for me, and I am very happy I picked it up. It's a stunning palette. There are not too many mattes here. That's why this palette ranks a little bit further out of my top palettes, but the shimmers are out of this world. A lot of these are multi-chromes, duochromes. They're so complex, they're so shifty, they're so foily, super reflective, super gorgeous. I understand the hype of Adapt Cosmetics shimmers now because there has been a lot of hype around them, and this palette is definitely super glamorous. It's such a high quality. The shimmer formula is also very, very unique. There's nothing like this in my collection. This has a very thin formula, however, very high pigment, high shine, high reflect. This is a fabulous palette, and I'm very happy I have this in my collection now. So we're in the top 5. Since the day that I got this palette, I continue reaching for it. And this palette just keeps delivering. It gives me everything that I need, everything that I want. It's inspiring. The quality is 10 out of 10, fabulous palette. Sugar and Grunge palette from Blend Bunny Cosmetics. This is a first palette for me from the brand as well. A little bit larger packaging, but that's fine. What's inside of this palette is so gorgeous and so fabulous. The formulas are stunning. I really love how this palette is organized. It's a foolproof situation here. You cannot fail your blending. You cannot. You just simply cannot. This palette just sets you for success because you get 3 different intensities in each color categories. I really love how this palette is organized. So you get your mattes here in the rows, and then the bottom row is your corresponding shimmers. The quality is exceptionally good. Mattes of Blend Bunny, one of the best mattes in my collection. Shimmer formula is spectacular. It's thin, it's reflective, it's smooth, it doesn't crease, it doesn't fall out. Fabulous, absolutely fabulous formula. I love this color story. I think that you can do a ton of monochromatic looks out of this. You can also keep this palette if you like more of a universal type of eyeshadow palette, because this serves you all different seasons, different holidays. There's so many different looks and color combinations that you can create out of this palette. I was so impressed by everything that this palette is. I definitely want to try more from the brand in the future. On the spot number 4, I do have a palette that's considerably new. However, I think for my personal preferences, for what I have in my collection, for what I've tried within the eyeshadow palette formulas, to me, this palette is so beautiful and so stunning. I love the looks that come out of this palette. Dragon Eye from What's Up Beauty. First palette for me, again from the brand. And this packaging, This packaging, stunning, absolutely stunning. I'm a huge GOT fan. I have been on a low buy this year, but when I saw the preview of this packaging, I was like, okay, they got me, because this design is absolutely insane. I also love how compact this palette is. It also has a mirror here, all the good stuff. It was a launch around Halloween, so you kind of get those like greens and purples. So I think they did very nice theming for that. When you definitely get the greens and purples, this side of the palette a little bit more purple. Here in this area, you get few shades that have green to them, or a lot of green to them, and some of them shift to from like gold to green. So there are quite a few duochromes here. They're very beautiful, smooth, reflective, complex shimmers, which are absolutely fabulous. I have to say that shimmers in this palette are absolutely fabulous. And matte formula is so smooth, so easy to blend. I do appreciate there's some neutrality here, because out of all the colors, purple is my least favorite. And I appreciate that there's neutrality here to neutralize the purple looks. Even though I think the shades here actually on their own are pretty, purple is just not my favorite shade. The quality of mattes and shimmers are just stunning, 10 out of 10 for me. One small thing that I have with this palette, and this is the reason why this palette didn't take like a second or first spot in today's video, is because this palette doesn't go super dark. They are deep, but they're not too deep. I feel like when you look at this palette, I mean, you have a dragon in the front. I really wish there was a black matte shade here. For me personally, when I look at the dragon, I think of something dramatic, very dramatic, and you definitely get some drama here. Don't get me wrong. I really wish that one of these shades was dark black. So on the first 3 spots, I don't think anybody's gonna be surprised. I've been talking about these palettes pretty much the entire year, or at least for the second part of the year. All these 3 palettes are very special in my collection. So in the spot number 3, I have this special palette. This is Glamlight and Hershey's Cookies and Cream palette. Compact, beautiful, gorgeousness. I really enjoy a good smoky eye look. However, when I do a good smoky eye look, I really love very high quality shimmers. I do not like a smoky eye with a boring shimmers. This is just not how it works in my mind. This palette definitely serves you to create beautiful smoky eyes. I really love that you get some of the gray shades here, and this gray is not like super gray. It's a little bit softer. It has a little bit like a taupiness in it. This row has some of the neutral shades, which I appreciate for variety. This bottom row is everything for me. I generally do not like gray tones on me. I think they age me. I don't think they're flattering on me. This row right here, the denim blues, so flattering. The makeup look that I created for this video, this is going to be my birthday look this year. I've already decided. My birthday is on New Year's Eve. I was born on December 31st, so there's always a party, there's always fireworks. I love to do a good smoky eye for my birthday because I like to go dramatic. Formula on these eyeshadows are just so easy to work with. I personally find that cool tone, dark shades are not the easiest to blend, at least for me, for my skin tone. And this palette's formula is so exceptionally good that the look that I created for the video, that smoky eye that I created for the video, it took me no time to do. You know, if you've ever created a very dark smoky eye, you know it can take you like 30 minutes of blending. I think I did the entire look in like under 10 minutes on both eyes. Shimmers are spectacular. The mattes, Glamlight definitely improved their matte formula, because my last palette from Glamlight was last year that I purchased, and the matte formula is not the best as there. It was more on the drier side. I would use a different technique applying and blending those shades. This formula is top-notch, 10 out of 10. There is no specific technique that you need. Anybody can use it, and it's absolutely stunning. Such a special palette in my collection. So on the spot number 2, Jewels and Gem palette from Odens Eye. Muted, jewel tone, cool tone color story. Who would think, right? I would always say that I love neutrals and I love warm tone colors. They did something with this palette. This is stunning. The looks that come out of this palette are just so gorgeous. I cannot get enough of this palette. The matte formula is 10 out of 10. Exceptionally good. Like buttery, just blends so easily. It's a therapy. Again, I would just say it's a therapy when you use this palette, and the shimmers are so stunning. They are super beautiful, buttery, reflective, like foily, and some of the shimmers are very nice and complex. They're just so gorgeous. I will say that again, using this palette is a therapeutic moment. When you just sit and you just have this like moment, you know, when you just enjoy it so much. This is what makeup is supposed to be. This color story is everything. This formula is everything. And I honestly, knowing how much I love my true neutrals and warm tone neutrals, I did not expect to like this palette at all. Absolutely stunning palette, one of the best palettes in my collection. So in the spot number 1, no one's a surprise. Absolutely no one. Yucca palette from Natasha Denona. Perfection. One word, perfection. I don't even have words. I think I've talked about this palette so much throughout the entire year. I've done so many different videos creating looks and tutorials. I think this palette just came in, took over the world very gracefully. To love this palette the way I do, and I know so many people also love, you need to love warm neutrals and you need to love somewhat greens, any type of like different shades of greens. This palette did everything for me. It's so inspirational. First, it seems like a very monochromatic palette and you will be out of your look options very quick, but no. They added some pops of color here. There's a little bit of coolness here. This palette was launched in summer and I'm still not out of options. This palette is so inspirational to me. The quality is top-notch Natasha Denona quality. The shimmers are the sparkling foils, which is my favorite formula of shimmers from Natasha Denona. They just look so stunning on eyes. Absolutely one of the best palettes Natasha Denona ever launched. So these are all the palettes that I've tried this year in 2023. This year, I definitely tried a good handful of indie brands and I definitely wasn't disappointed. I did tell you I was somewhat on a low buy. I wanted to stay under the number 30. I gave myself a cap and I think I did pretty good. I stayed under that maximum number. For the most part, minus few eyeshadow palettes, I enjoyed very, very much. They were different from each other, different formulas, but a good bunch of them were just out of this world, gorgeous and spectacular in their performance and color stories. This was definitely an interesting year of discovering some new formulas, new brands. I also want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments below what your favorite eyeshadow palette was for this year. Even if you haven't tried any new eyeshadow palettes, you can still let me know what your favorite eyeshadow palette is at the moment. I hope you guys having an amazing December and enjoying this magical holiday season with your loved ones. If you enjoyed this video, give this a thumb up and don't forget to subscribe if you're not yet a subscriber. And thanks so much for watching and I will see you in my next videos. Bye.